Imagine you're walking down a busy city street, right? And the person just ahead of you drops a crisp $100 bill. They don't even notice.
Oh, I already know where this is going.
Right. So a stranger behind them scoops it up, sprints a few steps to catch up, taps them on the shoulder, and just hands it back.
Yeah.
Now, be brutally honest with yourself here. Does a tiny cynical part of your brain immediately wonder, like, what their angle is?
Yeah.
Like, do you look around for a hidden camera, or do you assume they just, I don't know, wanted an audience to applaud their honesty?
I mean, it is almost a reflex for a lot of us. We're totally conditioned to assume that there's this hidden ledger in everyone's head. Like, we're constantly calculating the social or financial return on investment for every single good deed.
Exactly. We walk around with this illusion that human beings are naturally inescapably selfish, that we only do the right thing when there is a secret payoff for us, even if that payoff is literally just avoiding the guilt of feeling like a bad person.
Oh, definitely.
So today, we are tearing down that philosophical illusion. In this deep dive, we're exploring a fascinating stack of sources centered around a thinker who looked at that cynical ledger and completely ripped it to shreds.
Yeah, he really did.
We are talking about Francis Hutcheson. He was an 18th century Irish-born philosopher, an absolute superstar of the Scottish Enlightenment, and the mentor who directly shaped the minds of heavyweights like Adam Smith and David Hume.
Right, and Hutcheson is a giant in moral philosophy because he didn't just casually disagree with the darkness of his era. He systematically re-engineered how we understand the very mechanics of human goodness. I mean, he was writing at a time when the dominant intellectual trend was deeply, deeply pessimistic about human nature.
Right, and his counterattack was wild. We're going to explore how Hutcheson boldly dismantled the bleakest worldviews of his day, how he quite literally tried to calculate moral goodness with mathematical equations.
Yes, the math is amazing.
It's so good. And how he offered a surprisingly uplifting, psychologically bulletproof defense of why you and I are actually hardwired to care about each other. But to really get why Hutcheson was such a radical, we have to start with the villains of his story, right?
Right. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Hutcheson was primarily targeting the self-interest theories that were popularized by thinkers like Thomas Hobbes and Bernard Mandeville. They had established a very, very grim status quo.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Hobbes is famous for having a uniquely terrifying view of humanity. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, this is the guy who said life in our natural state is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
That is the exact quote. Yes, Hobbes basically argued that human beings are essentially biological machines and were solely motivated by self-preservation and personal appetite.
Wow.
You have to remember, he lived through the horrors of the English Civil War. That deeply influenced his view that when resources are scarce and everyone is blindly chasing their own desires, it just inevitably results in a war of every man against every man. For Hobbes, the concept of natural altruism wasn't just rare, it was biologically impossible.
So in his worldview, humans operate basically like ruthless, unregulated corporations.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But wait, what about charity?
Yeah.
How did Hobbes explain someone, I don't know, building an orphanage or giving away their wealth?
Well, he'd argue that charity is just a long-term PR strategy or a mechanism for power. For Hobbes and Mandeville, morality could never extend beyond what benefited the agent. They believed that our desires actually constitute the very nature of our good.
Okay.
So if you do something kind, your brain has simply calculated that this kindness will eventually bounce back to you. Maybe it's direct reciprocity, maybe it enhances your reputation, or maybe you are just trying to maintain a stable society so you don't get murdered in your sleep.
Right, right.
But true selfless benevolence, to them, it was completely a fairy tale.
I mean, it sounds so exhausting to live like that, viewing every friend, family member, and neighbor as a sleeper agent for their own ego.
It really is bleak.
But the sources show that Hutcheson reads this and essentially says, no, your entire premise of human psychology is completely flawed. And he counters with this radical movement called sentimentalism.
Yes, sentimentalism is the absolute bedrock of his philosophy. Hutcheson argued that goodness isn't the result of some cold, rational, self-interested calculation. He proposed that human beings possess a distinct moral sense.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this correctly. When he says sense, does he mean that literally? Like sight, touch, or hearing?
He means it quite literally, yes, but as an internal sense.
Okay.
So Hutcheson observed that we have physical senses that process simple ideas, right? colors, tastes, the temperature of a room. But we also possess internal senses that respond involuntarily to complex ideas.
Interesting.
The best analogy he uses is music. Think about listening to a symphony. You don't just sit there processing the raw mathematical audio frequencies, your brain processes harmony. If you have a good ear, you involuntarily perceive pleasure when you hear a beautiful melody. You don't sit there with a calculator determining if the sound waves are beneficial to your survival. The pleasure just hits you.
I see. So he's saying morality bypasses our rational calculator entirely.
Exactly.
So if I see someone hand that $100 bill back on the street, my brain doesn't pause to logically deduce how that honesty stabilizes the macroeconomy.
Nope.
I just witness the act, and this internal moral sense involuntarily fires off a feeling of pleasure. It instantly generates approval and love for the person doing it.
Precisely. You don't choose to find a sunset beautiful, right?
Right.
And according to Hutcheson, you don't choose to approve of a genuinely kind act. It is a built-in, unalterable psychological mechanism. He argued we are designed by nature to perceive moral beauty, and the crucial part is that this moral sense operates completely independently of our personal self-interest.
Okay, let me stop you right there and play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
Because if I'm a Hobbesian cynic, I'm listening to this and saying, sure, maybe the pleasure feels involuntary in the moment, but deep down, subconsciously, your brain is still doing the selfish math really, really fast.
Right, the hidden ledger.
Exactly. So if we have this built-in moral sense, how did Hutcheson actually prove to the skeptics of his day that we possess what the text calls disinterested benevolence, like the actual capacity to care for others without any secret selfish motive?
That is exactly the pushback he faced. And it is where Hutcheson's genius really shines. Because to definitively prove that human motivation isn't solely self-directed, he designed some incredibly vivid thought experiments.
Oh, I love these.
The first is often referred to as the annihilation experiment.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
It's brilliant in its extremity. So Hutcheson asks us to imagine a genuinely good man who is approached by a deity. The deity informs this man that in the very next instant, he's going to be completely and suddenly annihilated.
Wait, so no afterlife, no floating on a cloud looking down.
None. Complete erasure. No memory, no soul, no future capacity to feel pleasure or pain whatsoever. He will simply cease to exist.
Wow.
But the deity gives him one final choice in his last microsecond of existence. He can decide whether his family, his friends, and his country will be incredibly happy and prosperous forever or utterly miserable and destroyed.
Well, obviously, the man is going to choose for his loved ones to be happy.
But why? And this is where Hutcheson traps the cynics. If Hobbes is right, and we only desire things as a means to our own future private good, then this man mathematically shouldn't care at all.
Right, because he's gone.
Exactly. He won't be around to enjoy his family's happiness, and more importantly, because he is being annihilated, he won't be around to suffer the guilt of making them miserable.
Oh, wow.
His personal self-interest is literally zero. Yet we know instinctively that he would still desperately want his loved ones to thrive.
See, that is a massive hole in the cynical theory. The cynic usually argues, well, I only helped my brother because I'd feel guilty if I didn't. But if the capacity for guilt is entirely erased and you still help him, it proves the care was genuine all along.
Exactly. It proves that our concern for others is a primary psychological drive, not just a convoluted secondary way of caring about ourselves.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you could still argue that caring for your family is just biological nepotism, like it's an evolutionary extension of yourself.
Sure.
But Hutcheson doesn't let the cynics off the hook that easily.
Yeah.
He pushes the boundary to the absolute limit with the Pirate Island experiment.
Yes. This is his ultimate illustration of what he calls universal calm benevolence. Hutcheson tells us to imagine a band of ruthless, villainous pirates. They're cast away on a desolate, inescapable island at the furthest edges of the earth.
Okay.
And we are magically assured that they will never, ever be able to interact with the rest of humanity again.
So they are completely severed from our reality. They can't ever harm us, steal our ships, or boost our economy.
Exactly.
Our self-interest is totally removed from the equation.
Completely removed. Now, Hutcheson says, imagine we are handed a magic button to decide their ultimate fate. We could choose to have them turn on each other, plunging their swords into one another until they are all destroyed in a bloody frenzy.
Yikes.
Or we could choose for them to miraculously recover their humanity, become kind and compassionate, and build a peaceful, loving society on that island.
I mean, when you frame it like that, it's a total no-brainer. You want them to find peace. I love how relatable this is today. Like, think about how we consume fiction.
Yeah.
Why do you sit on your couch watching a movie about isolated characters stranded in space or on a desert island and actively, nervously root for them to survive?
Right, right.
Their survival pays zero dividends to your life. It doesn't feed you or pay your mortgage. But your brain still desperately wants them to thrive.
What's fascinating here is how effectively this shatters the foundation of Hobbesian philosophy. For Hutcheson, the undeniable fact that we wish for the happiness of distant, completely isolated villains proves that human beings possess a universal determination to benevolence. We inherently care about the natural good of mankind. And this leads to a very strict rule in his philosophy. For Hutcheson, true virtue only exists when an action flows directly from this pure, disinterested benevolence.
Wait, so the intent is literally the only thing that matters?
Absolutely. If you do an action that ends up saving 100 lives, but your internal motive was purely to get rich or famous, the moral value of that action, in Hutcheson's eyes, plummets to the floor.
Wow.
Our internal moral sense only lights up with approval when it detects genuine, unselfish benevolence.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because it naturally raises a huge logistical problem. We've established that humans have this pure benevolence, but a good heart doesn't automatically tell you how to run a society, you know?
Right, right.
We have to make real-world choices. If I have $50 to give to charity, do I give it to one starving person or do I split it among 50? How did Hutcheson suggest we measure the actual practical rightness of our actions?
To solve that, Hutcheson pioneered one of the most influential concepts in all of modern philosophy. Decades before Jeremy Bentham or John Stuart Mill made it the rallying cry of the utilitarian movement, it was Francis Hutcheson who first declared that the best action is the one that procures the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers.
See, that fact totally blew my mind in the research.
Yeah.
You always hear that phrase credited to the later 19th century utilitarians.
Oh, I know.
But Hutcheson didn't just casually coin the phrase. He wanted to compute the morality of human actions, the way a physicist computes the trajectory of a planet. He literally created a quasi-mathematical formula for it.
He did. He proposed a foundational equation, m equals b multiplied by a.
Right, so M is the moment of good, which equals B, your benevolence, multiplied by A, your abilities.
Exactly. The moral importance of an agent, the moment of good, is a compound ratio. You take how benevolent their pure intentions are and you multiply it by their actual practical abilities to carry out that good. If you are a king with immense wealth and power, your abilities variable is extremely high. If your heart is overflowing with universal, calm benevolence, your benevolence variable is high. Multiply them together, and you achieve a massive moment of good for society.
Okay, let me put this formula to the test, because the mechanics of this are wild to me.
Sure.
Let's say my abilities are off the charts. I'm a billionaire, and I donate $10 million to build a state-of-the-art children's hospital.
Sounds great so far.
But if we look at my benevolence variable, it's practically zero.
Mm-hmm.
I am literally only building the hospital because I desperately need a massive tax write-off, and I want a giant brass plaque with my name on it to stroke my ego.
Ah, okay.
In Hutcheson's strict mathematical system, is my moment of good essentially zero?
Yes. Under Hutcheson's system, it is absolutely zero. You get no moral credit.
Wow.
And this is exactly where he radically diverges from the later utilitarians who borrowed his greatest happiness catchphrase. Later thinkers like Bentham only cared about the outcome. Bentham would say, who cares why you did it? The children have a hospital now, so the action is morally good. But Hutcheson offers what modern scholars call a scalar motivational utilitarianism.
Okay, scalar motivational utilitarianism. Break that down for us.
It means morality isn't a simple binary of right or wrong based on the outcome. It exists on a scale of virtue, and the motive is the absolute vital multiplier.
I see.
Hutcheson explicitly stated that consequences only count toward your moral score if they are foreseen and consciously intended. To use an extreme example, if you accidentally cure a terrible disease while you are actively trying to invent a deadly poison to harm people, you do not get moral credit for the cure.
Because your B, your benevolence, was literally negative.
Exactly.
And the math gets even more unforgiving, doesn't it?
Mm.
The sources mention that Hutcheson actually forces you to deduct points for mixed motives.
Yes, that is the most rigorous part of his calculus. Let's go back to your hospital example. Let's say your total motivation to build the hospital is a 10 out of 10. But if we look closely at your soul, 8 points of that motivation are driven by your desire for the tax work, and only 2 points are driven by genuine, unselfish care for sick children.
So I have a tiny bit of genuine benevolence, but a lot of selfishness.
Right. Hutcheson says you must mathematically subtract your self-interest from your benevolence to find the true moral value. So 2 minus 8.
Oh, man.
Your net moral score is actually -6. Your self-interest consumed and overpowered your benevolence, rendering the act morally bankrupt in the eyes of the internal moral sense.
That is an incredibly high bar for human behavior. You literally have to audit your own soul and subtract your selfishness.
You do.
But this extreme demand for pure, selfless motivation leads us directly into what has to be the most glaring, mind-bending paradox in Hutcheson's entire philosophy.
Ah, yes, the hedonism paradox. This is where Hutcheson flips his own script entirely, and it was quite scandalous for his time.
Let me set this up, because it feels like a massive contradiction. We've just established that Hutcheson is fiercely obsessed with selfless benevolence.
Right.
He mathematically deducts points if you act out of self-interest. He demands that we act for the good of humanity without any regard for our own personal gain.
Yes.
Yet when you get to the core of his worldview, he ultimately argues that living a purely selfless life is actually the absolute best way to serve your own personal self-interest. He was a philosophical hedonist.
He was. And we really have to elevate how we think about hedonism here. In the 1720s, against a backdrop of strict, austere religious views that equated suffering with holiness, calling yourself a hedonist was deeply controversial. To say that happiness is entirely defined by pleasure and pain is the ultimate evil was a radical stance. Hutcheson explicitly writes that our sense of pleasure is the very foundation of what we call advantage.
So what does this all mean? How on earth does he bridge that massive gap? How does selflessly enduring hardship for a stranger like acting without any thought of your own pleasure magically result in making you the happiest, most pleasure-filled person in the room?
He bridges that gap by drawing on a psychological concept from another philosopher, Lord Shaftesbury, called the reflex act.
Okay.
Hutcheson argues that human beings possess a highly unique cognitive ability. We can step back and act as a spectator to our own minds.
Okay, let's use an analogy here.
Yeah.
So it's almost like our brain operates with a split-screen monitor.
Mm-hmm.
On screen one, we are experiencing the physical reality of helping someone, maybe we're enduring pain or losing money to do it. But on screen two, a completely separate observational system is evaluating our motives in real time.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. When you are out in the world committing an act of pure, disinterested benevolence, you aren't thinking about a reward. Your focus is entirely outward. But through this split-screen reflex act, your mind observes your own virtuous temper. You witness your own genuine love for others. And when your internal moral sense observes that pure motive on screen two, it triggers a massive flood of internal pleasure.
It's the ultimate philosophical explanation for the helper's high.
Exactly.
Imagine a parent painfully sitting through a 3-hour screeching, off-key middle school band concert just to support their kid.
Oh, painful.
Right. On screen one, the physical external senses are in absolute agony. The ears are suffering.
Yep.
But on screen two, the reflex act recognizes why they are doing it, out of pure, selfless love for their child. And suddenly, the internal moral sense is thrilled. The physical pain of the bad music is completely overridden by this deep, profound joy of being a loving parent.
Exactly. The physical senses might be enduring immense discomfort, but the moral sense is being stimulated, flooding the person with joy. But this raises an important question, one that modern scholars still debate when analyzing Hutcheson. Is the pleasure we get from moral virtue just a higher quality of pleasure? Is it spiritually nobler than, say, the pleasure of eating an amazing slice of pizza or winning a bet?
Which would make intuitive sense, right? Like a lot of 18th century philosophers love to categorize things into higher spiritual pleasures and base animal pleasures.
They did, and there are moments where Hutcheson uses lofty words like the dignity of virtue, but when you examine the cold, hard mechanics of his theory, the answer is surprisingly no.
Really?
Yeah, Hutcheson's hedonism is strictly quantitative. It isn't a different magical kind of pleasure. It is just mathematically more of it.
More math. He just can't help himself.
He really couldn't. He argued that the total value of any pleasure is simply its intensity multiplied by its duration.
Yep.
He believed it is just a biological, psychological fact of human nature that the moral sense happens to pump out a far more intense and infinitely more durable volume of pleasure than any physical sensation ever could.
So if you hook someone up to a hypothetical machine that just fed them endless physical pleasures, amazing food, perfect temperatures, endless comfort, but completely deprive them of friendship, love, and the ability to do selfless deeds, they would actually be miserable.
Profoundly miserable. Because physical senses adapt. You get full, you get bored, the pleasure spikes and then fades to zero.
Right, right.
But the pleasure generated by the moral sense, the joy of reflecting on your own honor, generosity, and pure benevolence through that reflex act, that pleasure has an incredibly high intensity and it lasts a lifetime. You can draw on it forever.
So the grand, beautiful takeaway of his philosophy is that the good life isn't just morally right in some abstract, finger-wagging, rule-following way. It literally mathematically feels the best. By intentionally giving up our selfish desires to help the greatest number of people, we accidentally stumble into the ultimate jackpot of human happiness.
It is a stunning reconciliation of human psychology. He took human nature, which Hobbes viewed as a violent, terrifying problem that had to be suppressed by fear and harsh laws, and he reframed it as a masterpiece.
That's beautiful.
For Hutcheson, human nature is a built-in compass. We are naturally biologically inclined toward compassion and mutual aid, and that very inclination is the engine that points us toward the greatest happiness.
This is such a sharp, refreshing lens to have in your toolkit. Because if you were listening to this, and you ever find yourself totally overwhelmed by the cynicism of the daily news cycle, or you catch yourself assuming that everyone has a hidden, selfish agenda, Hutcheson's framework is the perfect antidote.
It really is.
It is a rigorous, philosophically tested reminder that we aren't fundamentally broken or inherently ruthless. We possess this brilliant internal architecture that literally rewards us for caring about each other. It means that the next time you see someone do something genuinely kind, you don't have to desperately search for their angle. You can just let your own moral sense light up and appreciate the beauty of it.
It validates our deepest intuitions. It tells us that love, compassion, and community aren't just fragile social constructs we invented to survive. They have biological imperatives tied directly to our deepest capacity for joy.
It really does.
Yeah.
But it also leaves us with one final, almost mischievous thought to chew on as we wrap up. If Hutcheson's math is totally right, and our built-in moral sense truly does provide the most intense, most durable pleasure that is biologically possible for a human brain to experience, does that mean our noble pursuit of selfless goodness ultimately just makes us the most successful, ultimate pleasure seekers of all? Think about that the next time you see someone drop a $100 bill.